The city breathed luxury that morning. Wide streets reflected the gleam of glass and steel skyscrapers, and every storefront displayed clothes and jewelry that seemed to belong to another world. At the heart of this financial center stood the headquarters of Ferraz Corporation, a multi-million-dollar empire led by a man whose reputation was as imposing as his fortune, Alberto Ferraz. He wasn't just a successful businessman, he was the embodiment of arrogance and power, a man used to seeing everyone bow before his wealth. Yet in that same gleaming building on a forgotten floor was Clara, a young woman of humble origins. The daughter of a seamstress who spent sleepless nights just to provide the basics at home, Clara had managed to land a modest job as a cleaning assistant. Every day she arrived before dawn, sweeping hallways she had never dreamed of walking, polishing desks of executives who barely knew her name. But Clara was different. Her eyes carried something rare, a spark of intelligence and determination that didn't match the worn-out uniform she wore. While wiping down glass offices, her ears caught fragments of meetings and conversations. She absorbed financial terms, strategies, numbers. In the silence of late nights, she studied books borrowed from the public library and dreamed of something greater. It was on one of those mornings that fate brought two opposite worlds together. Alberto Ferraz, in his tailored suit and watch worth more than Clara's years of wages, walked into the office flanked by other executives. His loud laugh and air of superiority filled the room. "Do you see? The market is for the few. Those who weren't born with vision will never understand it," he declared, flaunting his confidence as he strode down the hall. Clara, focused on gathering papers from the floor, let her eyes flick upward. One of the executives noticed and, in a mocking tone, said, "Careful, boss. Looks like even the cleaning girl wants to learn economics from you." The room burst into laughter. Clara felt her cheeks burn but stayed silent. Alberto turned, gave her a once-over, and delivered the comment that would change everything. "If you can understand half of what we're discussing here, I'll give you my entire salary. In fact," he smirked, dripping with condescension, "if you can solve a challenge I set for you, I'll pay you $1 million. The laughter echoed like a slap. To everyone else, it was just a joke, a way to highlight the distance between them and the poor young woman. But Clara didn't smile. Her eyes locked on his, steady, fearless. "$1 million?" she asked softly but with unexpected firmness. "Then give me the challenge." For a moment, the room fell silent. The executives glanced at each other, stunned by her audacity. Alberto laughed, but deep inside he felt something he despised: discomfort. There was a confidence in the girl's eyes that didn't match her position. "Very well, girl, I'll prepare something, and let's see how far your courage goes." In that moment, the game began. Clara had no wealth, no status, but she possessed something none of them could imagine: a mind eager to learn, an unshakable determination, and the courage of someone who had nothing to lose. Fate had just thrown down an impossible challenge, and Clara was about to prove that impossible was only the beginning. That challenge Alberto Ferraz had thrown out seemed to most like nothing more than a cruel joke, a way to humiliate the young woman who dared meet his gaze. But to Clara, every word sank deep, like a silent promise. Even before she accepted the challenge, life had already taught her the weight of injustice and the strength of resilience. Clara grew up in a forgotten neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, where dirt roads ran between wooden houses patched together more with hope than structure. Her mother, Teresa, had worked as a seamstress since she was a child, raising Clara alone after being abandoned by her husband during pregnancy. Life had never been easy. Bills piled up, meals were rationed, and the fear of eviction never went away. Still, Teresa believed in one thing: knowledge could set her daughter free. Even though she couldn't afford good schools, she encouraged Clara to read everything she could get her hands on. "Books can take you places you can't even imagine," she used to say, handing her old magazines and discarded newspapers. Clara, in turn, was a sponge. From an early age, she showed a rare intelligence, quick to learn, sharp at memorizing details, and always questioning what she read. She loved solving problems, playing with numbers, imagining that one day she might work in a big company, maybe even start her own. But reality told her otherwise. Her social condition seemed like an unscalable wall. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of the city, Alberto Ferraz grew up surrounded by luxury. An only child of a powerful banker, he inherited not only a fortune, but also a sense of superiority that made him believe he was built differently from everyone else. He studied at the best universities abroad, always surrounded by flatterers. To him, people like Clara were nothing more than disposable pieces on the grand chessboard of success. Over time, Alberto became a legend in the business world. His skill at turning investments into fortunes was undeniable, but it came with an almost inhuman coldness. Stories of humiliated employees, betrayed partners, and crushed competitors circulated like inevitable rumors. Yet, the crueler he seemed, the more his name grew as a synonym for power. It was within this contrast of worlds that fate decided to play. Determined to change her reality, Clara accepted the first job she could get, a cleaning assistant at Ferraz Corporation's headquarters. While others saw only a janitor, she saw a unique opportunity to be close to the world she admired, to listen firsthand to the conversations she had only read about in books. And so she did. Every night after work, she studied at home with the few resources she had. She wrote down words she overheard in hallways, researched their meanings, and tried to piece together how that financial universe, so distant from her life, actually worked. Each new word was a puzzle piece in the secret picture she was building. What Alberto didn't know was that his playful challenge wouldn't be forgotten. To him, it was a passing comment. To her, it was the beginning of a mission. As Clara strengthened herself in silence, Alberto's close circle also began to take shape in the story. There was Carolina, his spoiled daughter, used to flaunting wealth and despising anyone beneath her social class. And there was Marcelo, Alberto's right-hand man, an ambitious executive who dreamed of inheriting the corporate throne. Both would become key players in what was about to unfold. Carolina looked at Clara as if she were invisible. In the hallways, she passed by without even acknowledging her presence. Marcelo, on the other hand, with his calculating eyes, noticed more than he let on. There was something different about the young woman compared to the other employees. The way she carried herself, the firmness in her gaze, the way she seemed to absorb everything around her. Yet even he underestimated her, just like everyone else did. Clara's world seemed far too small for the size of her dreams. But in the silence of her nightly studies, one certainty grew stronger. That challenge would be her chance to prove there was no wall too high for someone armed with determination. And so, two paths born from opposite extremes began moving toward collision. On one side, the man who believed money could buy everything. On the other, the young woman who had nothing but courage and intelligence. The stage was set. Clara's past had forged her into someone capable of weathering any storm. To Alberto, she was nothing but dust on his shoes. But life, in its quiet irony, was about to reveal who truly deserved to be called a winner. The weeks following Alberto's challenge passed as if nothing had happened, at least for him. The businessman carried on with his routine of luxury meetings, international trips, and billion-dollar decisions. For Clara, however, every single day was silent preparation, one step closer to what most considered impossible. During work hours, while polishing floors and wiping down desks, her sharp eyes caught details others would easily overlook. Every chart left behind on a table, every note scribbled on a meeting board, every stray phrase whispered in the halls was stored in her mind. At night, she transformed those fragments into knowledge. Her routine had become exhausting. She woke before sunrise to help her mother at home, worked all day at the company, and, once night fell, immersed herself in books on economics, finance, and management borrowed from the community library. Some nights, she fell asleep over the pages, drained. Still, she woke renewed, convinced she couldn't give up. It was during this time that she found an unexpected ally, Dr. Henrique, a retired lawyer who frequented the library. When he noticed how persistently Clara requested technical books and struggled to understand them, he approached. He quickly realized the young woman wasn't learning out of curiosity. She was learning to survive. "You have something most people don't, young lady. Hunger for knowledge. Use it to your advantage," he told her. Henrique began mentoring her, breaking down complex concepts, helping her interpret documents, and even lending books from his personal collection. For Clara, it was like having doors opened into a world she thought was unreachable. Meanwhile, inside Ferraz Corporation, Marcelo, Alberto's right-hand man, started noticing something unusual. One night, when he returned late to retrieve some files, he found Clara in the boardroom. She wasn't cleaning like someone mindlessly going through the motions. She was staring intently at the notes left behind on the table. "You're far too curious for a janitor," he said suspiciously. Clara, calm and unshaken, replied, "Curiosity costs nothing, and learning doesn't either." Marcelo laughed, but his gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. He couldn't tell if her boldness came from naivety or if it hid something more dangerous. At the Ferraz family mansion, Carolina, the magnate's daughter, continued her life of parties and excess. But when she noticed her father occasionally joking about a bold employee, her disdain for Clara deepened. To Carolina, it was unthinkable that someone from such a low position dared to even be mentioned in the same breath as her family. The tension was quietly growing. Clara was arming herself with knowledge, and each small victory was a step against the destiny imposed on her. Alberto, still oblivious, laughed with friends and retold the challenge as nothing more than an amusing anecdote, never realizing his arrogance had given the poor girl the fuel to transform her life. Until one day, during a major shareholders' meeting, Clara slipped quietly into the room to clean. On the table, she saw an important document, a financial report with glaring errors serious enough to compromise million-dollar investments. None of the executives had noticed, but Clara spotted the inconsistency almost instantly. Her heart raced. Right there was the opportunity fate had placed in her hands. But she knew if she revealed it prematurely, no one would believe her. She needed evidence. She needed strategy. And in that moment, Clara decided she wouldn't just take Alberto's challenge. She would use his own weapon against him, his arrogance. Clara's life was no longer the same as the humble girl who had first entered that company to sweep its corridors. Now, every step was part of an invisible preparation, and the conflict was beginning to take shape. The game of power was about to stop being a joke and become a silent war. That night, Clara went home with her heart pounding faster than usual. The report she had seen on the table wouldn't leave her mind. That mistake wasn't just a minor detail. It was a serious flaw in an investment forecast that could cost Ferraz Corporation millions. It was as if life itself had placed in her hands the key to turning the game around. But Clara knew she couldn't simply point it out. If she did, without proof, she would be mocked, dismissed as just the arrogant cleaning girl trying to teach finance to a magnate. She needed strategy, she needed time, she needed allies, and she was willing to risk everything. So she turned to Dr. Henrique, her unlikely mentor. In the quiet library room, she showed him the notes she had written from memory, describing what she had seen in the report. Henrique listened carefully, and after a long silence, he finally said, "Clara, you have a rare talent. You don't just observe, you understand what you observe. This mistake could be your opportunity, but you must prepare yourself. The world of the powerful is like a minefield. One wrong step, and they'll crush you." Those words echoed in her mind. Preparation was the key. Clara doubled down on her silent plan. Her nights of study grew even longer. She spent hours reviewing accounting and risk management concepts, learning how to calculate projections, understanding the mechanisms that governed major investments. Her notebook was already out of space, every page filled with calculations, strategies, and possible scenarios. Meanwhile, inside Faraz Corporation, Marcelo grew increasingly suspicious. He often saw the young woman paying too much attention, looking at documents with an expression that didn't match someone only interested in wiping tables. He decided to bring it up. "That girl is strange. She's not just a cleaner. She's keeping an eye on things she shouldn't," Marcelo said to Alberto. But the magnate laughed. "Marcelo, you're seeing conspiracies everywhere. She's nothing more than a poor girl dreaming of a better life. Let her play smart. That'll only make it funnier when reality hits her." That underestimation was exactly the opening Clara needed. Still, the journey wouldn't be easy. The first obstacle arose at home. Her mother, Teresa, began to notice how much her daughter was wearing herself out. Clara's dark circles grew deeper and sleepless nights were taking their toll. "You need to rest, daughter. You can't carry the world on your shoulders," her mother said with worry. Clara would hold her hand gently and reply, "Mom, I can't stop now. My whole life has been preparing me for this moment. If I give up, we'll always stay in the same place. I know I can do more." Her mother didn't fully understand, but she recognized the determination in her daughter's eyes, the same determination she herself had when she chose to raise Clara alone, against all odds. Each day, Clara's plan took shape. She decided to start small, proving herself with subtle victories. On one occasion, she quietly left an anonymous note on a manager's desk, pointing out a correction that prevented a calculation error. Nobody knew it was her, but the correction saved the company from an immediate loss. However, Marcelo noticed the note and began watching her more closely. Something inside him told him this young woman could be a real threat, and at the same time, an opportunity. If he could uncover the extent of her talent, maybe he could use her for his own gain. Meanwhile, Carolina, the magnate's daughter, began to feel uneasy hearing Clara's name come up as part of jokes during family dinners. To her, it was intolerable. She decided she would do everything in her power to humiliate Clara and put her back in her place. The tension was building. Clara, without realizing it, was no longer just a cleaner trying to study. She was becoming the center of an invisible game, where allies and enemies were quietly taking shape. But inside her, there was no room for fear. Every page she read, every mistake she spotted, every small secret victory brought her closer to the moment she was waiting for. The day she would face Alberto's challenge head-on and prove to the world that intelligence belongs to no one and to no social class. The big day came sooner than Clara had imagined. An emergency meeting had been called at Faraz Corporation. The shareholders were restless over rumors of losses in international investments, and everyone expected Alberto Faraz, with his usual arrogance, to present some brilliant solution. Clara, assigned to clean the room right after the meeting, already knew this could be the decisive moment. The flawed report would finally be on the table, and she now had not only her notes but also copies of documents she had discreetly obtained with Dr. Henrique's help. In the massive boardroom, the most powerful names in the market were present. Men in expensive suits, elegant women, all seated around a glass table that gleamed under the lights. Alberto entered with his usual imposing posture, wearing the smile of a man who believed he controlled everyone's destiny. "Gentlemen, today we will once again prove that Faraz Corporation is ahead of its time," he announced as he handed out the report. Clara, in her simple uniform, moved quietly through the room, adjusting chairs and pouring water. Nobody paid her any attention, but her eyes caught every detail. Her heart raced. As the shareholders flipped through the papers, doubt began to show on their faces. Murmurs grew louder. Finally, one of them spoke up. "Faraz, these numbers don't add up. The projections don't hold. This could cost billions." Alberto laughed, trying to minimize it as always. "Come on, gentlemen, you know forecasts always have margins. Confidence is what keeps us great." But the murmurs only grew. Marcelo, sitting beside his boss, watched everything closely. And then the unexpected happened. Clara, unable to hold back, stepped forward. "Excuse me?" Her voice echoed across the room, stunning everyone. Every head turned toward her, some with shock, others with disdain. Carolina, present to learn from her father, burst into mocking laughter. "And what does the cleaning girl think she can teach us now? Is she going to wipe the numbers clean too?" Alberto scowled, furious at the interruption. "Who do you think you are to interrupt a meeting of this level?" Clara stood firm. "I'm just someone who saw the mistake you refused to see." Silence filled the room. For the first time, her voice carried the weight of someone who no longer saw herself as a victim. She placed a small stack of papers on the table. Her detailed notes, comparisons, and calculations that revealed the inconsistencies in the report. Enrique, who had supported her behind the scenes, had reviewed every single number with her. There was no room for doubt. The shareholders leaned over the sheets, and soon the murmurs turned into exclamations of surprise. "She's right," said one. "These calculations clearly prove the failure. If we had followed this plan, it would have been a disaster." Alberto tried to reassert himself. "This is ridiculous. You're all believing scribbles made by a cleaning girl?" But Marcelo seized the moment. "With all due respect, Mr. Ferraz, the data presented here looks far more consistent than the official report. We need to take this seriously." The tension peaked. For the first time in years, Alberto felt his authority slip, and the one responsible was the very girl he had once humiliated in front of everyone. Carolina, furious, stood up and pointed at Clara. "This is outrageous. She's just trying to draw attention. Father, tell them to get her out of here right now." But the damage was done. The shareholders, once indifferent, now looked at Clara with respect. A simple employee had just saved the company from a disastrous decision, something the magnate with all his power and pride had failed to do. This was the turning point, the moment when truth rose above arrogance. Clara hadn't needed to shout, hadn't needed to make a scene. She simply placed the truth on the table, and that alone was enough to shake the very pillars of Alberto Ferraz's empire. The millionaire, red with rage, tried to end the meeting abruptly. But deep down, he knew he had lost something far more valuable than money. He had lost control. The meeting ended in silent chaos. The shareholders left with grim expressions, some whispering about the need for a deeper investigation, others already planning side meetings without Alberto's direct presence. For the first time in decades, the magnate felt the confidence of his investors slipping through his fingers like sand. Clara gathered her notes from the table, her posture unshaken. She hadn't asked for applause or recognition, but everyone knew she had changed the course of the discussion. The security guards hesitated to escort her out. Removing the only person who had just saved the company from financial disaster would have been foolish. That night, Alberto locked himself inside his private office. Marcelo entered cautiously, yet determined to seize the opportunity. "With all due respect, Mr. Ferraz, today's meeting shook the shareholders' confidence. Perhaps it's time to reconsider your approach." Alberto slowly turned his chair, his eyes burning with rage. "You too? Are you going to betray me like the rest? Do you think I'll give that insolent girl a stage? She's nothing but an employee, a speck of dust in my empire." But Marcelo smirked faintly. "Maybe it's exactly that speck of dust that could bring your castle down." Meanwhile, Clara walked home with steady steps. Her mother waited anxiously, but this time the brightness in her daughter's eyes spoke for itself. Clara didn't share details, but Donna Teresa understood. Her daughter had taken a step no one else dared. Yet fate still held another twist. Days later, an anonymous dossier began circulating among the shareholders and the press. Inside were confidential documents revealing Alberto Ferraz's shady dealings, manipulated reports, fraudulent investments, and corruption schemes that had kept his fortune intact. The journalists were relentless. Headlines exploded across the front pages. Ferraz Corporation involved in financial scandal. Alberto Ferraz's empire threatened by billion-dollar fraud. What no one knew was that this dossier had been born from Clara's careful observations. Alongside Dr. Henrique, she had gathered enough evidence to prove the mistakes weren't mere oversights. They were part of a corrupt system upheld by the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. The revelation hit like a bomb. Shareholders demanded Alberto's resignation. Official investigations were launched. The magnate who once laughed at everyone now found himself cornered, powerless to silence the truth. And in the middle of it all, Clara's unlikely figure rose. The young woman who had been ridiculed, humiliated, and called useless had brought one of the most powerful men in the country to his knees. Carolina, enraged, confronted her in the company halls. "You destroyed our family. You'll pay for this." But Clara, calm and steady, replied, "I didn't destroy anything. I only revealed what was always in front of you. The rest was just the consequence of your father's choices." The reversal was complete. Alberto's empire crumbled, and the voice no one listened to had become the loudest echo of all. Weeks had passed since the revelation that shook the Ferraz empire. The headlines gave no rest, and with each passing day, new discoveries about Alberto's financial misconduct came to light. The man once celebrated as a business genius now filled newspapers and TV programs as the prime example of corruption, arrogance, and downfall. The Ferraz Corporation, though shaken, did not collapse. Pressured by both the media and the public, the shareholders removed Alberto from the presidency and appointed new leadership. Marcelo, ever the opportunist, seized the moment, rising to a prominent position and becoming the key figure responsible for restructuring the company. Carolina, on the other hand, sank into bitter silence. Accustomed to luxury and entitlement, she watched her castle of privilege crumble before her eyes. She tried to blame Clara on several occasions, but no one listened anymore. The world had understood that the ruin came from within, born of the very corruption her father had nurtured. Alberto, isolated in his mansion, surrounded by lawyers and investigations, had become a shadow of the man he once was. The pride was gone, replaced by a face etched with anger and belated regret. He had never imagined his defeat would come not at the hands of a billionaire rival, but from someone he had scorned, someone he deemed worthless. Meanwhile, Clara's life took a new course. She remained humble, but now was seen with respect by all around her. The young woman who once felt invisible had become a symbol of courage, intelligence, and determination. Her nights of study had not been in vain. Universities and smaller companies began reaching out, offering her scholarships and opportunities. One sunny afternoon, as she walked through the neighborhood square with her mother, Donna Teresa, moved to tears, said, "Daughter, you proved to the world what I always knew. You were never useless. They were just too blind to see your worth." Clara smiled, holding her mother's hand firmly. "Mom, I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because I needed to prove to myself that I had a voice. And today, I know I can choose my own path." In that moment, she looked toward the horizon and realized it had never been about defeating Alberto Ferraz. It was about conquering doubt, breaking the invisible chains that tied her to the belief that she was less than she truly was. The legacy of this story was not in the millions lost, nor in the newspaper headlines. It lived in the example of a young woman who, though called worthless, proved that no one is defined by the eyes of those who despise them, but by the strength to keep believing in themselves. And so Clara's silence, her silent revenge, proved far more devastating than any loud confrontation. Because when they finally needed her, when the empire crumbled and the truth could no longer be ignored, it was already too late.